Hello, this is the Psychopath and the Idiot. And today, well, as you see, we're in
Did you know
Minecraft. Fuck you, I'm
that
gonna fucking kill you.
snowballs are really cold?
Hello, this is the Psychopath and the Idiot. And today we are in Minecraft, but we're not gonna play Minecraft. We're gonna read it.
What?
We're gonna read
I don't
it.
want to read it.
You don't need
What's
to read
it?
it. It is it.
But wait, how does that go? But what is it?
That is it.
I don't remember that one. I
No.
don't remember it.
Okay,
It's a lot of it.
shut the fuck up. The terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did, end, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter, swallowing with rain. The boat bobbed, listed right at itself again, dived bravely through treacherous whirlpools, and continued on its way down Witcham Street, toward the traffic light which marked the intersection of Witcham and Jackson. The three vertical lenses on all sides of the traffic light were dark. This afternoon in the fall of 1957, and the houses were all dark too. There had been steady rain for a week now, and 2 days ago the winds had come as well. Let's just jump ahead until where it gets cool, because this is boring.
Hello, Georgie.
Basically, that's where I'm going for, yes. Okay. Sitting up in bed, she's... No. Georgie, you waste. There followed. He got up and walked over to the storm drain. Oh, there we go. Need to put something so it doesn't close. Okay. Now here he was, chasing his boat down the left side of Witcham Street. He was running fast, but the water was running faster, and his boat was pulling ahead. He heard a deepening roar and saw that 50 yards further down the hill, the water in the gutter was cascading into a storm drain that was still open. It was a long, dark semicircle cut into curving. And as Georgie watched, a striped branch, its bark is dark and glistening as sealskin shot into the storm drain's maw. It hung up there for a moment and then slipped down inside. That was where his boat was headed. Oh shit, and Shinola, he yelled dismayed. He put on speed, and for a moment he thought he would catch the boat. Then one of his feet slipped and he went sprawling, skinning one knee and crying out in pain. From his new pavement-level perspective is the word, he watched his boat swing around twice, momentarily caught in another whirlpool, and then disappear. Shit and Shinola, he yelled again, and slammed his fist down on the pavement. That hurt too, and he began to cry a little. He's a fucking idiot, isn't he? What a stupid way to lose the boat. He got up and walked over to the storm drain. He dropped to his knees and peered in. The water made a dank, hollow sound as it fell into the darkness. It was a spooky sound. It reminded him of... Huh? The sound was jerked out of him, as if on a string, and
What?
he recoiled.
What?
There were yellow eyes in there. The sort of eyes he had always imagined, but never actually seen down in the basement. It's an animal, he thought incoherently. That's all it is, some animal. Maybe a house cat that got stuck down in there. Still, he was ready to run. He would run in a second or two when his mental switchboard had dealt with the shock those two shiny yellow eyes had given him. He felt the rough surface of the macadam under his fingers and the thin sheet of cold water flowing around them. He saw himself getting up and backing away, and that was when a voice, a perfectly reasonable and rather pleasant voice, spoke to him from inside the storm drain. "Hi, Georgie," it said. Georgie blinked and looked again. He could barely credit what he saw. It was like something from a made-up story or a movie where you know the animals will talk and dance. If he had been 10 years older, he would not have believed what he was seeing. But he was not 16, he was 6. And there was a clown in the storm drain. The light in there was far from good, but it was good enough so that George Denbrough was sure of what he was seeing. It was a clown, like in the circus or on TV. In fact, he looked like a cross between Bozo and Clarabelle, who talked by honking his, or was it her? Georgie was never really sure of the gender. Horn, on Howdy Doody Saturday mornings. Buffalo Bob was just about the only one who could understand Clarabelle, and that always cracked George up. The face of the clown in the storm drain was white. There were funny tufts of red hair on either side of his bald head, and there was a big clown smile painted over his mouth. If George had been inhabiting a later year, he would have surely thought of Ronald MacDonald before Bozo or Clarabelle. The clown held a bunch of balloons, all colors, like gorgeous ripe fruit in one hand. In the other, he held George's newspaper boat. "Want your boat, Georgie?" the clown smiled. George smiled back. He couldn't help it. It was the kind of smile you just had to answer. "I sure do," he said. The clown laughed. "I sure do. That's good. That's very good. And how about a balloon?" "Well, sure." He reached forward and then drew his hand reluctantly back. "I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers. My dad said so." "Very wise of your dad," the clown in the storm drain said, smiling. How, George wondered, could I have thought his eyes were yellow? They were a bright dancing blue, the colour of his mom's eyes. And Bill's. Very wise indeed. Therefore I will introduce myself. I, Georgie, am Mr. Bob Gray, also known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Pennywise, meet George Denbrough. George, meet Pennywise. And now we know each other. I'm not a stranger to you, and you're not a stranger to me. Correct?" George giggled. I guess so." He reached forward again and drew his hand back again. "How did you get down there?" "Storm just blew me away," Pennywise the Dancing Clown said. "It blew the whole circus away. Can you smell the circus, Georgie?" George leaned forward. Suddenly he could smell peanuts, hot roasted peanuts, and vinegar. The white kind you put on your French fries. Through a hole in the cap, he could smell cotton candy and frying doughboys, and a faint but thunderous odor of wild animal shit. He thought to himself, wait, no, that's not in the book. He could smell the cherry aroma of Midway sawdust, and yet under it all was the smell of a flood and decomposing leaves. In dark storm drain shadows, that smell was wet and rotten. The cellar smell. But the other smells were stronger. "You bet I can smell it," he said. "Want your boat, Georgie?" Pennywise asked. "I only repeat myself because you really do not seem that eager." He held it up, smiling. He was wearing a baggy silk suit, with great big orange button, a bright tie, electric blue, flopped down his front. And on his hands were big white gloves, like the kind Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck always wore. "Yes, sure," George said, looking into the storm drain. "And a balloon? I've got red and green and yellow and blue. Do they float?" "Float?" The clown's grin widened. "Oh yes, indeed they do. They float. And there's cotton candy." George reached. The clown seized his arm, and George saw the clown's face change. What he saw then was terrible enough to make his worst imaginings of the thing in the cellar look like sweet dreams. What he saw destroyed his sanity in one clawing stroke. "They float!" the thing in the drain groaned in a glotted, chuckling voice. It held George's arm in its thick and wormy grip. It pulled George toward that terrible darkness where the water rushed and roared and bellowed as it bore its cargo of storm debris toward the sea. George craned his neck away from that final blackness and began to scream into the rain, to scream mindlessly into the white autumn sky which curved above Derry. On that day in the fall of 1957, his screams were shrill even, and piercing, and all up and down Witcham Street. People came to their windows or bolted out onto their porches. "They float," it growled. "They float, Georgie, and when you're down here with me, you'll float too." George's shoulders soaked against the cement of the curb, and Dave Gardiner, who had stayed home from his job at the showboat that day because of the flood, saw only a small boy in a yellow rain slicker, a small boy who was screaming and writing and writhing in the gutter, with muddy water surfing over his face and making his screams sound bubbly. "Everything down here floats," that chuckling, rotten voice whispered, and suddenly there was a ripping noise and a flaring sheet of agony, and George Denborough knew no more. Dave Gardiner was the first to get there, and although he arrived only 45 seconds after the first scream, George Denborough was already dead. Gardiner grabbed him by the back of the slicker, pulled him into the street, and began to scream himself as George's body turned over in his hand. The left side of George's slicker was now bright red. Blood flowed into the storm drain from the tattered hole where the left arm had been. A knob of bone, horribly bright, peeked through the torn cloth. The boy's eyes stared up into the white sky, and as Dave staggered away toward the other, already running pell-mell down the street, they began to fill up with rain. Somewhere below in the storm drain that was already filled nearly to capacity with runoff. There could have been no one down there. The county sheriff would later exclaim to a Derry News reporter with a flustered fury so great it was almost agony. Hercules himself would have been swept away in that driving current. George's newspaper boat shot onward through nightened chambers and long concrete hallways that roared and shimmed with water. For a while it ran neck and neck with a dead chicken that floated with its yellowy reptilian toes pointed at the dripping ceiling. Then at some junction east of town, the chicken was swept off to the left while George's boat went straight. An hour later, while George's mother was being sedated in the emergency room at Derry Home Hospital, and while stuttering Bill sat stunned and white and silent in his bed, listening to his father sob hoarsely in the parlour where his mother had been playing for Elise when George went out. The boat shot out through a concrete loophole like a bullet exiting the muzzle of a gun, and ran at speed down a sluice way and into an unnamed stream. When it joined the boiling, swollen Penobscot river, 20 minutes later, the first rifts of blue had begun to show in the sky overhead. The storm was over. The boat dipped and swayed and sometimes took on water, but it did not sink. The two brothers had waterproofed it well. I do not know where it finally fetched up. If ever it did, perhaps it reached the sea and sails there forever like a magic boat in a fairy tale. All I know is that it was still afloat and still running on the breast of the flood when it passed the incorporate town limits of Derry, Maine, and there it passes out of this tale forever. And that's the end of chapter 1. That will do for now.
That was a really good chapter. I don't like books, but that
Yeah, I like that. And that will do. I'm ending